Chapter 22. Jonathan Harker's Journal. 3rd October. I must do something or go mad, so I write in this diary. It is now 6 o'clock, and we are to meet in the study in half an hour and take something to eat, for Dr. Van Helsing and Dr. Seward had agreed that if we do not eat, we cannot work our best. Our best will be, God knows, required today. I must keep writing at every chance, for I dare not stop to think. All, big and little, must go down. Perhaps at the end, the little things will teach us the most. The teaching, big or little, could not have landed Mina or me anywhere worse than we are today. However, we must trust and hope. Poor Mina told me just now, with tears running down her dear cheeks, that it is in trouble and trial that our faith is tested, that we must keep on trusting, and that God will aid us to the end. The end. Oh my God, what end? To work. To work. When Dr. Van Helsing and Dr. Seward had come back from seeing poor Renfield, we went gravely into what was to be done. First, Dr. Seward told us that when he and Dr. Van Helsing had gone down to the room below, they had found Renfield lying on the floor all in a heap. His face was all bruised and crushed in, and the bones of his neck were broken. Dr. Seward asked the attendant, who was on duty in the passage, as if he had heard anything. He said that he had been sitting down. He confessed to half-dozing, that when he heard loud voices in the room, and then Renfield called out loudly several times, "God! God! God!" After that there was a sound of falling, and when he entered the room, he found him lying on the floor, face down, just as the doctors had seen him. Van Helsing asked if he had heard voices or a voice, and said that he could not say. That at first it seemed to him as if there were two, but as there were no one else in the room, it could have only been one. He could swear to it, if required, that the word God was spoken by the patient. Dr. Seward said to us that when we are alone, that he did not wish to go into the matter. The question of an inquest had been considered, and that it would never be put forth the truth, as no one would believe it. As it was, he thought that the attendant's evidence he could give a certificate of death by misadventure in falling from bed. In case the coroner should demand it, there would be a formal inquest, necessary to the same result. When the question began to be discussed as to what should be our next step, the very first thing we decided that Mina should be in full confidence. That of nothing of any sort, no matter how painful, should be kept from her. She herself had agreed as its wisdom, and it was pitiful to see her so brave yet so sorrowful, and in such deep depths of despair. "There must be no concealment," she said. "Alas, we have had way too much of it already, and besides, there is nothing in the world that can give me more pain than I have already endured, that I suffer now. Whatever may happen, it must be of new hope, or of new courage to me." Van Helsing looked at her fixedly as she spoke, and said suddenly and quickly, "But, dear Madam Mina, are you not afraid? Or if not for yourself, but for the others from yourself, after what has happened?" Her face grew set in its lines, but her eyes shone with the devotion of a martyr as she answered, "Ah, no, for my mind is made up." "To what?" he asked gently, whilst we were all very still, for each of us in our own way had a sort of vague idea what she meant. Her answer came with direct simplicity, as though she were stating this as a fact. "Because if I find in myself, and I shall watch keenly forward, a sign of harm to any I love, I shall die." "You would not kill yourself?" he asked hoarsely. "I would, if there were no friend who would love me, who would save me from such pain and so desperate an effort." She looked at him meaningly as she spoke. He was sitting down, but now he rose and came close to her and put his hand on her head and said solemnly, "My child, there is such one if there was for you good. For myself, I could hold it in my accounts with God to find such a euthanasia for you, even at this very moment, if it were best, nay, were it safe. But my child. For a moment he seemed choked. A great sob rose in his throat. He gulped it down and went on. There are here some who would stand between you and death. You must not die. You must not die by any hand, but least of all by your own, until the other who has fouled your sweet life is true dead. You must not die. For if he is still with the quick undead, your death will make you even as he is. No, you must live. You must struggle and strive to live. Though death would seem a boon unspeakable, you must fight death himself, though he came to you in pain and in joy, by day or by night, in safety or in peril. On your living soul I charge you that you do not die, nay, nor think of death, till this great evil be past. The poor dear grew white as death, and shocked and shriveled, as I had seen a quicksand shake and shiver at the incoming of the tide. We were all silent. We could do nothing. At great length she grew calm, and turned to him, and sweetly, oh, but so sorrowfully, she held out her hand. I promise you, my dear friend, if God will let me live, I shall strive to do so, till if he may be in his good time, this horror may have passed away from me. She was so good and brave, that we all felt our hearts were strengthened to work and endure for her, and we began to discuss what we were to do. I told her that she was to have all the papers in the safe, and all the papers or diaries and phonographs that we might have hereafter use, was to keep the record as she had done before. She was pleased at the prospect of anything to do, if pleased could be used in the connection with so grim an interest. As usual, Van Helsing had thought ahead of everyone else and was prepared with exactly ordering of our work. It is perhaps well, he said, that our meeting after our visit to Carfax we decided not to do anything with the earth boxes that lay there. Had we done so, the Count might have guessed our purpose, and would doubtlessly have taken measures in advance to frustrate such an effort with regard to the others. But now he does not know our intentions. Nay, more, in all probability, he does not know that such a power exists to us as can sterilize his layers, so that he cannot use them as of old. We are now so much further advanced in our knowledge as to their disposition that when we have examined the house in Piccadilly, we will have tracked the very last of them. Today, then, is ours, and in it rests our hope. The sun that rose on our sorrow this morning guards us in its course. Until it sets tonight, that monster must not retain whatever form he has now. He is confined to within limitations of his earthly envelope. He cannot melt into thin air nor disappear into cracks and chinks and crannies. If he go to a door, he must open the door like a mortal. So now that we have the day to hunt out all his layers and sterilize them, so we shall. If we have not yet catched him and destroyed him, drive him into bay in some place where the catching and destroying shall be in time sure. Here I started up, for I cannot contain myself at the thought of that the minutes and seconds so preciously laden with Mina's life and happiness were flying from us, since whilst we talk action was impossible. But had Van Helsing held his hand up warningly, "Nay, friend Jonathan," he said, "in this the quickest way to home is the longest way, so your proverb will say. We shall all act and act with desperate quick when the time has come. But think, in all probability, to keep to the situation is the house in Piccadilly. The Count may have many houses that he has bought. Of them he will have deeds of purchase, keys, and other things. He will have the paper he wrote on. He will have his books of checks. There are many belongings that he must have somewhere. Why not in this place so central, so quiet? There he may come and go, by front or by back at all hour. Then, in the very vast of the traffic, there is none to notice. We shall go there and search that house, and we will learn what it holds. Then we will do what our friend Arthur calls, in his phrases of hunt, stop the earths, so we can run down our foxes. So, is it not? Then let us come at once, I cried. We are wasting precious, precious time. The professor did not move, but simply said, And how are we going to get into that house in Piccadilly? Any way, I cried. We shall break in if we need be. And your police, where will they be and what will they say? I was staggered, but I knew that if he wished to delay, he had a good reason for it. So I said as quietly as I could, Don't wait more than need be. You know I am sure what torture I am in. Ah, my child, that I do, and indeed there is no wish for me to add to your anguish, but just think what we can do, until all the world is at movement. Then will come our time. I have thought and thought, and it seems to me that the simplest way is the best of all. Now we wish to get into the house, but we have no key. Is that not so? I nodded. Now, suppose that you were in truth the owner of that house, and could not get in, and think there was to you no conscience of the housebreaker, what would you do? I should get a respectable locksmith, and set him to work to pick the lock for me. And your police, they would interfere, would they not? Oh, no, not if they knew the man was properly employed. Then, he looked at me as keenly as he spoke, all that is in doubt is the conscience of the employer and the belief that your policeman as to whether or not the employer is as good conscience or a bad one. Your police must indeed be zealous men and clever, oh so clever, in reading the heart, that they trouble themselves in such a manner. No, my friend John. You go take the lock off 100 empty houses in your London or in any city in the world, and if you do as such things is rightly done, and at the time that things are so rightly done, no one will interfere. I have read of a gentleman who owns so fine a house in London, and when he went for months to summer in Switzerland, and lock up his house, some burglar came and broke window at back and got in. Then he went and made open the shutters in front and walked in through the door before the very eyes of the police. And he have an auction in that house and advertise it and put up big notice, and when the day came to he sell off by great auctioneer all the goods of that other man who owns him. Then he go to a builder and he sell him that house, making an arrangement to, as he put it down, and take it all the way in a certain time. And your police and other authorities help him all the way they can. And when that owner come back from his holiday in Switzerland, he find only an empty hole where his house had been. This was all done in regale. In our work shall be done in regale too. We shall not go so early, so that the policeman would then little of the think of shall deem it strange, but we shall go after 10 o'clock. Then there are many about, and such things will be done when we are indeed the owners of the house. I could not but see how right he was, and the terrible despair on Mina's face became relaxed. The thought there was hope in such good counsel. Van Helsing went on. When once within that house, we may find more clues. At any rate, some of us can remain there, whilst the rest of us finds the other places where more earth boxes, at Bermondsey and Mile End. Lord Godalming stood up. I can be some of use here, he said. I shall wire my people to have horses and carriages where they are the most convenient. Now look here, old fella, said Morris. It is a capital idea that all will be ready in case we want to go some horseback riding. But don't you think that one of your scrappy carriages with its heritage adornments in the byway of Walmore or Mile End would attract too much attention for our purposes? Seemed to me that we ought to take cabs to go south or east, or even leave them somewhere near the neighborhoods where we're going to. Friend Quincy is right, said the professor. His head is what you call in plane of the horizon. It's a difficult thing that we go do, and we do not want no peoples to watch us if we do may. Mina was growing interested in everything, and I was rejoicing to see the emergency of affairs had helped her to forget that, for a time, the terrible experience of the night. She was very, very pale, almost ghastly, and so thin that her lips were drawn away. showing her teeth in somewhat prominence. I did not mention this last, lest it should give her needless pain, but it made my blood run cold in my veins to think of what occurred with poor Lucy when the Countess had sucked her blood. As of yet there is no sign of the teeth growing sharper, but the time as yet grows short, and there is time to fear. When we came to the discussion of the sequence of our efforts and the disposition of our forces, there was a new source of doubt. It was finally agreed upon that before starting off for Piccadilly, we should destroy the Count's lair close at hand, in case he should find out too soon. We should be thus ahead of him in our work of destruction, and his presence is in a purely material shape, and at his weakest might give us some new clue. As to the disposal of our forces, it is suggested to the professor that, after our visit to Carfax, we should all enter the house in Piccadilly, and that the two doctors and I should remain there, whilst Lord Godalming and Quincy found the lairs in Walworth and Mile End and destroy them. It is possible, if not likely, the professor urged that the Count might appear in Piccadilly during the day, and that if we so might be able to cope with him then and there. At any rate, we might be able to follow him in force. To this plan I strenuously objected, and so far as my going was concerned, I said that I intended to stay and protect Mina, though I thought that my mind would be made up on the subject, but Mina would not listen to my objection. She said that there might be some law on the matter in which I could be useful, that amongst the Count's papers might be some clue that I could understand out of my experience in Transylvania, and that, as it were, all my strength could muster would require it to cope with the Count's extraordinary power. I had to give in, for Mina's resolution was fixed. She said that it was the last hope for her that we all work together. As for me, she said, I have no fear. Things have been bad as they can be, and whatever may happen must have some element of hope or comfort. Go, my husband. God can, if he wishes it, guard me as well alone as with my one present. I started to outcry up. Then in God's name let us come at once, for we are losing time. The Count may come to Piccadilly earlier than we think. Not so, said Van Helsing, holding up a hand. But why? I said. Do you forget, he said with an actual smile, that last night he banqueted heavy and will sleep late? Did I forget? Shall I ever? Can I ever? Can any of us ever forget that terrible scene? Mina struggled hard to keep her brave countenance, but the pain overestimated her, and she put her hands before her face and shuddered while she moaned. Van Helsing had not intended to recall her frightening experience. He had simply lost sight of her and her part in the affair in his intellectual efforts. When it struck him what he said, he was horrified at his thoughtlessness and tried to comfort her. Oh, Madam Mina, he said, dear, dear Madam Mina, alas, that I, of all whose whole reverence you should have said something so forgettable. These old lips of mine, then, these stupid old head do not deserve so, but you will forget it, will you not? He bent low beside her as he spoke. She took his hand, looking at him through her tears, and hoarsely, No, I shan't forget, for it is well that I remember, and with it I have so much memory of you that is sweet, I would take it all together. Now you all must be going. Breakfast is ready, and we all must eat so that we can be strong. Breakfast was a strange meal to us all. We tried to be cheerful and encourage each other, and Mina was the brightest and most cheerful of us. When it was over, Van Helsing stood and said, Now, my dear friends, we go forth on our terrible enterprise. Are we all armed, so that we are armed that night when we first visited our enemy's lair, armed against ghostly as well as the carnal attack? We all assured him. Then it is well. Now, Madam Mina, you are in any case quite safe here until sunset, but before then we shall return, if we shall return. But before we go, let me see you armed against a personal attack. I myself, since you came down, prepared your chamber by placing things of which we know, so that he may not enter. But let me guard yourself. On the forehead I touch this piece of sacred wafer in the name of the Father, the Son, and the... There was a fearful scream which almost froze our hearts to hear. As he placed the wafer on Mina's forehead, it had seared it. had burned into the flesh as if it had been a piece of white-hot metal. My dear's, my poor darling's brain had told her the significance of the fact as quickly as her nerves received the pain of it, and the two so overwhelmed her that her outright nature had its voice in that dreadful scream. But the words of her thought came quickly. The echo of the scream had not ceased to ring on the air when there came the reaction, and she sank to her knees on the floor in agony of abasement, pulling her beautiful hair over her face. As the leper of old his mantle, she wailed, "Unclean! Unclean! Even the Almighty shuns my polluted flesh. I must bear this mark of shame upon my forehead until Judgment Day." They all paused. I had thrown myself beside her in agony of helpless grief, and putting my arms around her, held her tight. For a few minutes our sorrowful hearts beat together, whilst the friends around us turned away their eyes that ran tears silently. Then Van Helsing turned and said gravely, so gravely that I could not help feeling that he was in some way inspired and was stating things outside of himself. "It's maybe that you have to bear that mark until God sees fit, as he most surely shall on that judgment day redress all wrongs of the earth and of his children needy placed therein. And oh, Madam Mina, my dear, may we who love you be there to see, when that red scar, the sign of God's knowledge of what has been, shall pass away and leave your forehead as pure as the heart we know. For so surely as we live, that scar shall pass away when God sees right to lift that burden upon us, till we bear our cross, as his Son did in obedience to his will. It may very well be we are chosen instruments of his good pleasure, and that we will send to his bidding, as others through stripes and shame, through tears and blood, through doubts and fears. And all of that makes the difference between God and man." There was hope in his words, and comfort, and they made for resignation. Mina and I both felt so, and simultaneously we took each one of the old man's hands and bent over and kissed it. Then without a word we all knelt down together, and all holding hands swore to be true to one another. We men pledged ourselves to raise the veil of sorrow from the head of her whom, in each in our own way, we loved, and we prayed for help and guidance in the terrible task that lay before us. It was then time to start. So I said farewell to Mina, parting which neither of us shall forget to our dying day, and we set out. To one thing I have made up my mind: if we find out that Mina must be a vampire in the end, then she shall not go into that unknown and terrible land alone. I suppose it is thus that in old times one vampire meant many. Just as their hideous bodies could not only rest in sacred earth, so the holiest love was the recruiting sergeant for their ghastly ranks. We entered Carfax without trouble, and finding all the things the same as at the first occasion. It's hard to believe that amongst the so prosaic surroundings of neglect and decay and dusk, there was any ground for such fear as we had knew. Had our minds been made up, and had there not been terrible memories to spur us on, we could hardly proceed with our task. We found no papers or any sign of use in the house, and in the old chapel the great boxes looked just as they had did when I had seen them last. Dr. Van Helsing said to us solemnly as we stood before them, "And now, my friends, we have a duty here. We must sterilize this earth, so sacred of holy memories, that he is brought from distant land for such fell use. He has chosen this earth because it has been holy. Thus we must defeat him with his own weapon, and we will make it more holy still. It was sanctified for such use of man, and now we sanctify it to God." As he spoke, he took from his bag a screwdriver and a wrench, and very soon the top of one of the cases was thrown open. The earth smelled musty and close, but we did not somehow mind, for our attentions were so concentrated on the professor. Taking from his box a piece of sacred wafer, he laid it reverently on the earth, and then shutting the lid, began to screw it home. We aided him in his work. One by one we treated the same with each of the great boxes, and left them as we found them in all appearance, but in each a portion of the host. When we closed the door behind us, the professor said solemnly, "So much is already done. If it may be that all the others we can be so successful, then the sunset of this evening may shine upon me, Madam Mina's forehead, all white as ivory, with no stain." As we passed across the lawn on our way to the station to catch the train, we could see the front of the asylum. I looked eagerly, and in the window of my own room saw Mina. I waved my hand to her, and she nodded to tell her that our work was successfully accomplished. She nodded in reply to show that she understood. The last I saw, she was waving her hand in farewell. It was with a heavy heart that we sought the station and caught the train, which was steaming in the direction of the platform. I have written this in the train. Piccadilly, 12:30 o'clock. Just before we reached the Fenchurch Street, Lord Godalming said to me, "Quincy and I will find a blacksmith. He will better not come with us in case there should be any difficulties, for under the circumstances it would seem bad for us to bring into an empty house. But you are a solicitor, and the Incorporated Law Society might tell you that you should know better." I demurred as to my not sharing any danger, even of odium, but he went on, "Besides, it will attract less attention if there aren't too many of us. My title will make it all right with the locksmith, and any policeman that may come along. You'd better go with Jack and the professor, and stay in the Green Park, somewhere inside of the house. And when you see the door open and the smith has gone away, do all come across. We shall be on the lookout for you, and shall let you in." "The advice is good," said Van Helsing, so we said no more. Godalming and Morris hurried off in a cab. We followed in another. At the corner of Arlington Street, our contingent got out and strolled into the Green Park. My heart beat as I saw the house on which so much of our hope was centered, looming up grim and silent in its deserted condition amongst the more lively and spruce-looking neighbors. As we sat down on the bench within good view and began to smoke cigars as to attract as little attention as possible. The minutes passed with laden feet as we waited for the coming of the others. At length, we saw a four-wheeler drive up. Out of it, in leisurely fashion, got out Lord Godalming and Morris, and down from the box descended a thick-set workman with his rusty wooden basket of tools. Morris paid the cabman, who touched his hat and drove away. The two ascended the stairs, and Lord Godalming pointed out what was need to be done. The workman took off his coat leisurely and hung it up on one of the spikes on the rail, saying something to the policeman who had just sauntered along. The policeman nodded acquiescence, and the man kneeled in place with his bag beside him. After searching through it, he took out a selection of tools, which he produced to lay beside him in an orderly fashion. Then he stood up, looked into the keyhole, blew into it, and turned to his employers, making some remark. Lord Godalming smiled, and the man lifted a good-sized bunch of keys. Selecting one of them, he began to probe the lock, as if feeling his way in. After fumbling about with it a bit, he tried a second, and then a third. All at once the doors opened under a slight push from him, and then he and the two others entered the hall. We sat still. My own cigar burned furiously, but Van Helsing's went cold altogether. We waited patiently as we saw the workman come out once and bring his bag. Then he held the door open partly, steadying his knees, and whilst he was fiddling with the key to the lock. Then he finally handed to Lord Godalming, who took out his purse and gave him something. The man touched his hat, took his bag, put on his coat, and departed. Not a soul took the slightest notice of the whole transaction. When the man had fairly gone, we three crossed the street and knocked at the door. It was immediately opened by Quincy Morris, beside whom stood Lord Godalming, lighting a cigar. "This place smells so vilely," said the latter as we came in. It did indeed smell vilely, like that old chapel in Carfax. And with our previous experience, it was plain to us that the Count had been using the place pretty freely. We moved to explore the house, all keeping together in case for an attack, for we knew we had a strong and wily enemy to deal with, and as yet we do not know whether the Count might not be in the house. In the dining room, which lay in the back of the hall, we found 8 boxes of earth. 8 boxes out of the 9 which we sought. Our work was not over, and would not be until we had found the missing box. First, we opened the shutters of the window, which looked out across the narrow stone-flagged yard with a blank face of a stable pointed out to look like the front of a miniature house. There were no windows in it, so we were not afraid of being overlooked. We did not lose any time in examining the chests. With the tools we had brought with us, we opened them, one by one, and treated them as we treated those in the others of the old chapel. It was evident that the Count was not present in the house, and we proceeded to search for any of his effects. After a cursory glance at the rest of the rooms, at the basement to the attic, we came to the conclusion that the dining room contained any effects which might belong to the Count, so we proceeded to minutely examine them. They lay in a sort of orderly disorder on the dining room table. There were title deeds of the Piccadilly house in a great bundle, deeds of the purchase of the house at Mile End and Belmonte, note paper, envelopes, pens, and inks, all covered in a thin wrapping paper to keep them from the dust. There was also a clothes brush, a brush and a comb, and a jug and basin, the latter containing dirty water, which was reddened as if with blood. Last of all was a heap of keys of all sorts and sizes, probably those belonging to the other houses. When we examined this last find, Godalming and Quincy Morris, taking accurate notes of the various addresses of the houses on the east and south, took with them the keys in a great bunch and set out to destroy the boxes in these places. The rest of us are, with what patience we can, waiting for their return, or the coming of the Count.